I'm going to share my screen right now. Hang on. Can we see that?
Yep.
Okay. Well, hello from Costa Mesa, California, everyone. And look, if, at my age, I'm going to take the phone off the hook here. At my age, I could drop dead at the drop of a hat here. And if I would only have 2 or 3 minutes to uh, share something very important with everybody before lightning strikes me or something like that, here's what I would like to share. Vote, please, everyone. If you're old enough to vote, vote. Vote as if your life depended upon it. Vote as if the earth, our Mother Earth, depends upon it. Vote as if our religion, our spiritual world depends upon it. Uh, Please, if you haven't voted already, do so. So, I'm here in Southern California, and I'm just tickled to be part of the fun here at the Chicago Pagan Pride. Of course, I would rather be there with everybody in person. I love Chicago. I spend a lot of time in Chicago, and I tell people all over the world that Chicago is one of my favorite cities in all the world. I've got wonderful friends in Chicago, Ellen Selmy and the one and only Janet Barris and Jason Winslade, who's going to be talking here a little later today. And I wish I could be with you all in person. Um, but anyway, I'm going to have to just kick it off here. So I've thanked Matt and the organizers for letting me be part of the fun, and for letting me share how a lazy magician reads tarot cards. Now, I'm sure most of us know that tarot cards have been used for centuries by psychics and fortune tellers and mystics and magicians and frauds and scoundrels and crooks. But in the West, tarot is perhaps the most recognizable of all popular divinatory devices. And when I first started to study tarot way back in the 1970s, I was an embarrassingly diligent student of the marvelous Builders of the Adytum Tarot and Kabbalah correspondence courses. And if they're still available, I'm not sure if they are, but I think they are. I would recommend those their correspondence course to anyone interested in tarot or the Kabbalah-based foundations of tarot. Now, make no mistake, BOTA strongly discourages using tarot for fortune telling. The monographs caution students that they said, cripple themselves spiritually if they fall into that foul habit. And as many of you probably know, there's more than enough Kabbalistic wisdom of the ages to keep a Kabbalah-based tarot magician busy for many lifetimes without having to go into the fortune-telling business. And I just love the way, excuse me, I just love the way the BOTA tarot and Kabbalah lessons were presented. So, but then around, I guess it was 1972, while I was shopping at the old B. Dalton Pickwick bookstores. I don't know if anybody remembers when B. Dalton's was called Pickwick bookstores, but they had a big one in Costa Mesa, California. And I ran across the Thoth Tarot. Now, this is the edition that I ran across. It was in a box with a beautiful little slip case, gold slip case, and it had the OTO's lamin on the front of it. And back then it was $12. Excuse me, I'm going to drink some coffee here and clear my throat. I just had breakfast, so. The Thoth Tarot really blew my mind because they were just awesomely beautiful, and they were terrifying at the same time, at least for me at that time. I was, 28 years old or something like that, 26. After a few panicky weeks of being totally freaked out about all of the horrible things I heard about Aleister Crowley, I finally snapped out of it and began a new chapter in my life. I gradually developed a new and more open-minded attitude about divination in general, and about the Oracle of Tarot in particular. Like everything else in my life, my understanding of things it's still in a constant state of flux. And it's been nearly 50 years since my first BOTA tarot lesson, and I've settled pretty firmly on a handful of some basic principles. And if you'll indulge me, these I call the 7 secrets of fortune telling. They're very simple, fundamental truths that form the very foundation of my personal universal field theory of divination. So before I share the specifics of how I read tarot cards, let's quickly learn the 7 secrets of fortune telling. The first one is psychic powers. You're full of it. You're more psychic than you think. And don't hide behind false modesty and pretend you're not psychic. For God's sake, don't be afraid that psychic powers are unnatural or some kind of curse. If you still think that, snap out of it. You're more psychic than you think. Many people believe that only certain people have fortune-telling power. Well, everyone is psychic. Some are just more in touch with their natural abilities than others. And I haven't always felt that way as a young occultist. I was pretty satisfied believing myself to be the most unpsychic person on earth. A strange little episode back in the early 70s, excuse me, involving an ill-conceived practical joke would force me to seriously rethink this attitude. Now, I tell this whole story. I've got a copy of it. I've got to tell this whole story in my book, the Book of Ordinary Oracles. And but just briefly, a wealthy friend of ours hosted a weekly dinner party for her impoverished, and most occultists are impoverished, her impoverished hippie occult friends, including local psychics and mystics and spoon benders, and including the wild and eccentric and impoverished hippie couple, the DuQuette family. I didn't have much to contribute to the conversation, so to sing for our supper, I allowed myself to be drafted to to read people's tarot cards using that new Thoth tarot deck I was telling everybody about. But I made it perfectly clear to everyone that I didn't have the slightest idea what I was doing. The cards just more or less read themselves. I just laid them out in the simple sort of Celtic cross spread that I learned from the old hippie Morgan Tarot. I don't know if anybody out there has experienced or seen the Morgan Tarot, the old one, which is a very hippie tarot deck. But the little booklet taught you how to do the Celtic cross. And so I just spread the cards out in a Celtic cross on the dining room table, and I started to babble. The titles, which are pretty much the essential meanings of the cards, are already printed on each card of the Thoth Tarot. And also, if you look hard enough, you can see the appropriate astrological symbols on the Thoth Tarot deck too. So what little I knew about the individual cards, that was just enough to get me started blathering away. Then just sort of mindless, free association took over. I wasn't pretending to be psychic. In fact, I repeatedly told everybody, this is just for fun, guys. But despite my protests to the contrary, one of the guests started to take things, far too seriously. And she made me uncomfortable. And after a while, she made me feel a little bit guilty because she had immediately became convinced of my magical powers and my psychic omniscience. And the more I denied it, the more she would raise her eyebrows and coo and go, ooh, all the really heavy psychics deny it. I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. So to make matters worse, no matter how hard I tried to give her just a goofy, absurd, stupid reading, still they turned out to be, according to her, profoundly accurate. Each week I dug myself deeper and deeper into the pit of this poor woman's delusional projections. I finally decided that for her own good, I'd do something about it. And so at the next meeting, I decided I would lie. And I would tell her that I had a dream about her in a previous incarnation, and then tell her the most hilariously bizarre story. It was a stupid thing for me to do. I truly, I'm ashamed. Constance and I made up this wild, goofy story. But I mistakenly fantasized we'd all eventually have a good laugh, and that perhaps she'd realize that she was being naive, and that she shouldn't really place that much faith in psychics, especially phony ones like me. The details of the phony story are really pretty hilarious. Something about her being born a Hebrew slave girl in Babylon who was sold to the priests of the temple of Mabuba, the great frog goddess. Well, I hope you'll get a chance to read more about it in the Book of Ordinary Oracles, because it really is pretty funny. But to finish up, the whole thing backfired on me, okay? My crazy story actually matched other past life readings she had recently received from two other Southern California psychics. right down to her having webbed toes and the name which I concocted for her, Miriam. Now, we know there's no way of proving whether or not this is any kind of a bona fide case of psychic ability or mental telepathy or just another one of those crazy synchronicities that from time to time just make us scratch our heads and say, wow, far out, man. And perhaps they're all the same thing. Now, as silly as the whole story is, the whole episode made me rethink my whole attitude about the nature of so-called psychic abilities and the fact that they're already happily bubbling away inside of each of us. And that, like it or not, each and every one of us is armed by nature with a strange sort of information stream that seems to connect us all. You can call that psychic ability or you can call it whatever you want. All I know is that when it comes to fortune telling, the oracle isn't the tarot cards or the tea leaves or the Yi Ching or the runes. You are more psychic than you think, and the oracle is you. In the last 50 years, I've talked to hundreds of people who consult oracles. Many are professional tarot readers. Others simply read cards or cast the runes or consult the I Ching for their friends and acquaintances. Almost without exception, these professional and amateur seers tell me that it's difficult, if not impossible, to get a satisfactory answer when the question concerns themselves. The reason we're so good at consulting oracles for others is that when we're detached from the question and the questioner, we become the perfect little reflection of the all-knowing, yet completely disinterested oracular deity. When we're detached, we're free to be cavalier and indifferent, just like the oracular deity. We're free to be ruthless and rude, just like an oracular deity. Our disinterest creates a mirror. And the more disinterested we are, the clearer the mirror's surface becomes. It's easy to hold the mirror up before somebody else's face and tell them, well, there it is, you poor bastard. Take it or leave it. However, the mirror of indifference becomes very cloudy when the question concerns you and the poor fool, the poor bastard, is you. To overcome this handicap, you must first come to the full realization that the oracle is you, and that you are a far greater intelligence than you ever imagined possible. The next thing you must understand concerns the nature of time itself. Secret number 3, there is no future, only the great now. Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking, said, the laws of science do not distinguish between the forward and backward directions of time. Now, it was probably easy for him to understand, but the rest of us are pretty much stuck with the illusion of time marching forward. Since the dawn of consciousness, we've tried to look into the future to see what's coming. Personally, I don't understand why anyone would want to see the future too clearly. especially their own future. I don't. Give me a break. The fortune teller's fourth, uh, or excuse me, fourth secret. Uh, excuse me, we're still on the third secret. Uh, this third secret is that there is no future to look into. Do I need to say that again? There's no future to look into. There's only the great now. And the great now is a funny thing. It's like money. It seems to be in a perpetual state of passing away. That's not really the case, however. The great now is in a perpetual state of being. That's being with a capital B, as in supreme being. If you could actually achieve consciousness of the great now, you would realize and understand the wall-to-wall singularity of being. The ecstatic consciousness of perpetual nowness. I know that's not a word. You'd no longer be an observer of events and phenomena, because in the great now, the observer and the observed are the same thing. Obviously, this is a difficult concept to grasp with everyday consciousness. That part of you that thinks that yesterday is somehow existing in the past and tomorrow is just the day after tomorrow's yesterday. You're stuck in a catch-22. In order to see the future, you must be in that perfect place where seeing and the seen don't exist, and neither does the future. Confused? That's why we have oracles. Oracles don't show you the future or answer your questions. They're simply devices that announce the status of the great now. When you consult an oracle, you must somehow see the future or hear the answer to your question in that announcement. And that can be very difficult. Or it could be just as simple as opening your eye. Fortune teller's fourth secret is that the oracle is a superior intelligence. When you consult an oracle, you are really making contact with some supernatural intelligence who actually cares about your health, your love life, your lawsuits, or your publishers. Not. But actually, you really are making contact with a supernatural intelligence, although supernatural may not be the best word for it. Nature as yet unexplained may be a better way to put it. Look, I could get all psychological and Jungian about this and point out that when you successfully consult an oracle, you're really tapping into higher levels of consciousness that someday we'll be able to measure with a machine and weigh on a scale. And that it's the nadir of superstition to personify and objectify your oracular deity in the same way our prehistoric ancestors did. But to this objection, I say, so freaking what? If it works, go with it. You tap into all sorts of primal and extremely powerful cosmic and personal juju when you, even for a few moments, play along with the scenario. With fear and trembling, I approach your throne, almighty, omniscient oracle. Treat the oracle as a superior intelligence because it is a superior intelligence. It doesn't matter if it lives in your brain or your soul or your liver or your pineal gland or in Brahmaloka or Valhalla or heaven or hell or Graceland. That said, it's fair to ask, who is this superior intelligence? Does it have a name? Is it a god? If so, what god? I can't answer those questions. At least I can't answer those questions for you. Oh, I can get on my soapbox and shout my belief that each one of us is ultimately the oracular superior intelligence, or if you prefer, the microcosmic reflection of the one big superior intelligence. But because you and I are different units of that inscrutable whole, we each have our own unique vocabulary of images and spiritual ideals. And they push the buttons of our potential oracular talents. I may prefer to imagine that I'm melding with the mind of Lao Tzu when I consult the I Ching. You, on the other hand, may resonate to the image of a Chinese dragon or Buddha or R2D2. I talked to one very talented tarot reader who happily considers himself an atheist, and he attunes himself to the residual mental energy fields of Albert Einstein. That's so cool. In any event, you're going to have to use some technique to get out of your own way and trick your stupid self into listening to your wise and all-knowing self. If you don't already have one, consider adopting a deity or some other spiritual being to personify your own personal oracular intelligence. Some colorful, omniscient character you can invoke to manipulate the divination process and give your interpretation an answer. It's a very common practice for tarot card and palm readers in the United States and in Latin America to say a quick prayer to Jesus, the Virgin Mary, or one of the saints before proceeding. The adepts of the Golden Dawn invoke the Gnostic deity Iao to send Hru, the great angel they believed was especially sacred to the hermetic forces inherent in the cards. The invocation went like this: I invoke thee, Iao, that thou wilt send Hru, the great angel that is set over the operation of this secret wisdom, to lay his hand invisibly upon these consecrated cards of art, that thereby we may obtain true knowledge of hidden things to the glory of thine ineffable name. Amen. Whatever your feelings are about the existence or the non-existence of gods, goddesses, or spiritual entities, I'll wager you find the business of consulting an oracle more effective and more accurate if you first prime your pump, the pump of your psychic potential, by turning the proceedings over to the higher power, even if you believe with your cold intellect that that higher power is ultimately you. After all, it's not your cold intellect that's doing the work or receiving the answer when you consult an oracle. So feel free to pick any character with whom you can form a devotional relationship. Now, personally, I love Mark Twain. I've even developed an oracle that speaks in his words. But as deities go, I love the Hindu elephant god Ganesha. He's so cute. He's so easy for me to visualize in my mind and approach in prayer. I don't care, neither does Ganesha if I'm not an Orthodox Hindu. When I want to come face to face with God, it's just easy for me to picture the face of Ganesha. But use whomever you want, as long as it's an icon of your ideal higher intelligence, your ideal of the supreme, omniscient intelligence of the universe. Invoking this superior intelligence is the first step toward getting out of your own way. And once you're comfortable with your relationship with the image and person of your superior intelligence, it'll be easier for you to go to work with the fortune teller's fifth great secret. And that is, the oracle is always right. Like it or not, you must start with the irrational supposition that the oracle actually works and that it gives accurate answers 100% of the time. If you're unable to make this assumption, you may as well believe that the oracle never gives accurate answers and forget about divination altogether. If, after the fact, the oracle's answer doesn't seem to agree with your observations, you must be willing to blame the inconsistencies upon your interpretation of the answer and seek through analysis and meditation to resolve the seeming contradictions. I won't lie to you. Very often, it's difficult, if not impossible, to get an understandable answer from an oracle. That doesn't mean, however, that you haven't received the answer. And unless you can maintain your respect for the oracle's wisdom, even after it gives you a completely inscrutable response, you are in danger of severing your connection with the superior intelligence. Put yourself in the superior intelligence's place. Would you really want to continue a relationship with some moron who repeatedly pounds on your celestial door and demands that you answer his or her questions? And then time and time again, you answer the door and give the poor idiot the best and most truthful answer you can. And then time and time again, he or she just slams the door in your face and says, gee, that doesn't make any sense. I guess the superior intelligence isn't home today. Face it, you're the one who is not on top of the situation. Otherwise, you wouldn't be turning to an oracle for answers. There's one thing that makes the interpretation process easier. In fact, it's the central secret of all divination. The question itself is more important than the answer. In his book, in his book, Physics and Philosophy, Werner Heisenberg, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century and one of the founders of quantum mechanics, said, nature never reveals itself to us as it is, but rather always through the questions we put to it. Now, he was obviously aware of the fortune teller's sixth great secret. The oracle knows everything, but for heaven's sake, don't expect it to read your goddamn mind when your mind hasn't even formulated a decent question. When it comes to consulting an oracle, you've got to do some work. You've got to be specific with your question. If you haven't sufficiently formulated in your own mind what you want to know, then there is nothing to which the superior intelligence can respond. Don't ask things like, should I quit my job and accept this new job offer? Well, you'll get an answer for sure. And the answer will be, what kind of a ridiculous question is that? What are you asking here? Should you? Well, maybe you should, because it'll be good for your old boss who wishes you were gone so he could hire somebody else who will work for less money. Should you? Maybe you should, because your new boss will now have you to replace the last poor idiot he or she drove insane. Should you? Maybe you should, because at your new job, you'll accidentally blow up the factory, killing yourself and half the town, including a little baby who is destined to grow up to be worse than Hitler and destroy the world. Should you? Look, how do you expect an oracle to answer that? The oracle could answer, for heaven's sake, no, you'll kill a little baby, or hell yes, go ahead, make your enemies happy, save the planet. You got to be specific. Give your question some thought and narrow it down to what you really want answered. When you become truly serious about your question, when you discard all the stupid little questions that address only the symptoms of your predicament, when you finally come to terms as to what you really want to know, then the question becomes the answer. And in that golden moment, the answer is everywhere, and you can see it in anything you observe. I'm going to repeat that. When you actually know the question, the answer is everywhere, and you can see it in anything you observe. You can see the answer by observing atmospheric phenomena or dust clouds. You can see it in a rooster pecking grain. You can see it in facial features or numbers or letters or names, or in the behavior of birds or the characteristics of wind. You can read it in random pages in books, in snippets of television programs, in water currents or herbs or in smoke. You can discover it in playing cards or looking at a mirror, or by letting molten wax drip into water, or examining the lines and features of a hand. It may come to you when you clack two rocks together, or in chance remarks or events, or in a crystal or finger rings. You may hear it in a person's way of laughing, or see it in marks of the earth. You may speak it after whirling around. You get so dizzy you fall down and puke. It may appear in salt or in animal entrails or livers, in water or fish, in the flame of a candle or in oil on water, in stones or pearls, or in fire. You may discern it in moles on the body or in scurrying mice. Dead people can carry the message. It can be in shadows and ghosts or dreams. Snakes may reveal it, or the flight of birds, or fountains, or pebbles. It may be hidden in the bumps on the head, or in the face, in the shoulder blades of animals, or in their behavior. It can even be found in excrement. Yeah, they call that scatoscopy. Or in urine, urinomancy. Yeah, those are real divinatory arts. Look, but even though the answer can be found anywhere and in anything, it's easy to behold it in something that's perfect. And that brings us to the seventh secret. The oracle works because it's perfect. In the little book, it's just the sweetest little book, Wind, Sand, and Stars, by the author of The Little Prince. He wrote, "Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away." The great now resides in perfection, and the best oracles work because they're perfect, or as closely approaching perfection as the human mind can address. Truth reveals itself in perfection. The sublime perfection of nature, the sun, the moon, the planets, the stars. Each are characters in a cosmic spectacle acted out upon a stage of perfect universal laws. The astrologer observes these perfect movements and draws upon past indications and internal wisdom to peer into the future. Beauty is perfection. In beauty is eternal truth revealed. The image of a dew-dappled rose can stun the sensitive heart, inspire poets to pour out their souls in verse, each line more truthful than the last. How many times have you resolved a great life question while walking on the beach or gazing at some monument of natural beauty? Mathematics is also perfection, and even though algebra and trigonometry may have left you cold in school, the truths revealed and concealed in numbers are said to be the music of the spheres. According to the Hebrew Kabbalists, numbers are the executors of creation and the key to accessing the mind of God. And many of the numbers important to Kabbalists are the same numbers that affect the processes of tarot divination. Keeping these seven secrets in mind as our divination field theory, let's move ahead with our discussion right now. In the early 1990s, my wife Constance and I created a deck of tarot cards called Tarot of Ceremonial Magic. Of course, I had to write a book to go with it. And a few years ago, I was asked to write a book about Aleister Crowley's famous Thoth Tarot. I don't know how many of you are my Facebook friends or following my adventures on Facebook, but this morning I started reading this book, Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, at 10 o'clock, and I'll continue reading the whole thing. So tune in at 10 o'clock, and I'll be reading this book. Throughout the years, I've written other books that touch on the subject of tarot, and I'm not telling you all of this to prove what a big authority I am or anything on the subject, but at least to give you an idea of how much time I've spent or wasted over the last 50 years thinking about this stuff. I certainly don't consider myself the world's best tarot reader, but it's something I do, and I do a lot of it, both for myself and clients around the world. First of all, let's be clear. There's no correct or incorrect way to read tarot cards. You can use any method that works for you. You know, if you want to believe you're contacting some particular god or angel or spirit of your departed grandmother or Cleopatra, that's perfectly okay. Because in the quantum world of divinatory consciousness, myths and metaphors are real. They're modules, units, modular units of living intelligence. It's all a consciousness thing. Existence itself, you, me, the gods, angels, myths, monsters, everything. Matter, energy, motion, time, everything is an aspect, an expression of consciousness. Secret number 1 taught us that we're all far more sensitive and psychic than we can possibly imagine. And if we could just wake up and simply accept our true nature, would realize that we are in essence one and the same with this supreme omniscient consciousness of the cosmos. And for the supreme omniscient consciousness of the cosmos, there is no truth hidden. And we can discover that truth if we somehow, just for a moment, get out of ourselves, trick our sleeping cells into just getting that out of the way. Out of the way, just long enough to let our true nature shine through. Getting to that point is the key to all divinatory arts. Once we get to that point, and if we really know what our true question is, then most any technique of divination can reveal that truth to us. I imagine many of you already read tarot cards for others. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have kind of signed up for today's talk. And I bet many of you would agree with me that it's much easier to read for others than it is to read for yourself. And that's because it's just much easier to get out of your own way when you read for other people. I know it is for me. When I'm emotionally detached from the issue, I'm free to be relaxed and lazy. I can be ruthlessly more honest and forthcoming in my interpretation of the cards as they can relate to the client's particular issue. When you read for yourself, you have to be just that relaxed. You have to be just that lazy. You have to be just that detached, just as you would with a client. And you must also be just as ruthless with yourself and be ready to face unpleasant developments should they appear. Now, to do that, you sort of have to split in two and treat yourself like the client. So, what I'm now about to say about working with a client, I want you to also apply to yourself when trying to read for yourself. It's hard, but it's not impossible. And it really must be achieved before you're ever going to accurately read for yourself. I don't know about you, but I always make a few things clear to the client from the very beginning. I don't predict the future, but I hope that our reading will help the client intuit the likely effects of their own decisions and behavior. I'll only discuss my understanding of the cards as they might relate to the client's questions or issues. And just always remember, it's the client's reading, not yours. Even when I'm reading for myself, it's the client's reading, not mine. Is it paradox? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. But live with it. It will help you wake up. But let's continue today's discussion as if you're reading for another person as the client. First, attune yourself to the client. Then together, attune yourself to the cards. You and the client become, as it were, a single entity. This is tricky when reading for yourself, but you must consciously make the effort. Okay, this next one might really be difficult for many of you to keep in mind. Your familiarity with the tarot and your knowledge of the traditional divinatory meanings for each card, while being very important, is a secondary consideration. Your client's internal subjective psychic response to the card is what's important. That's the voice of the oracle. That's where the magic happens. That's where and when the answer first declares itself. Your job is to meld with the client and empathize with that initial psychic response, and then stay out of the way. Well, so much for theory. Let's get to how I read tarot cards. If you're going to read for others, you should probably develop your own equivalent to a doctor's bedside manner. Put the client at ease. I start off by just small talk, normal talk, the same as you would meeting with a friend and just shooting the shit for a while. Get a giggle or two. Step 2 is discuss the issues and determine the real question on the client's mind. I actually ask, what possessed you to seek out a tarot reading? And then we laugh. But I'm only half joking. From the magician's point of view, the client's question or issue or problem is a spirit. And once the magician has the spirit's name, it can be dealt with. The question is the answer. As a matter of fact, when we truly know the question, the answer is screaming at us from all sides in every voice of every observable phenomena, including the tarot cards. But the real question is seldom what the client thinks it is at first. Your job is to ferret out the real motives behind the initial question. I tell the client, I can't read your mind. I want to know everything. Tell me the issues that have made you so desperate that you've come to a tarot reader. Discover why the client wants the reading. Discover that, and you've discovered the answer. From that moment on, the client is primed and ready to listen to the voice of their own inner psychic fortune teller, speaking through every comment you make about every card you draw. And your job will be to stay attuned with the client and not distort that voice. Now, the client must perform some magic to place herself or himself in the tarot universe. And where that happens is in step 3, determine the significator. In my opinion, tarot trump cards do not make good significators. The 22 trumps represent huge archetypal aspects of existence, forces of karma and destiny. Using one of them to represent the client is like pulling 1/22nd of the entire universe out of existence for the purpose of the divinatory table of contents. The 16 court cards and the 36 small cards represent solid segments of objective space-time. In the same way as the moment and location of our birth takes a snapshot of the universe when we're born. Among other things, court cards can obviously and conveniently represent people. Of course, you could choose the significator based on your own intuition or even what the client looks like. But I like to synchronize the client to the basic astrological harmonies they already share with the cards, because 12 of the 16 court cards, the knights, queens, and princes, or in older decks that would be called the kings, queens, and knights, of each suit are assigned to periods 30 degrees of the zodiacal year, from 20 degrees of one sign to 20 degrees of the next. Now you may ask, what about the princesses or the page? Don't the princesses get degrees of the zodiac to rule? No, they don't. They're screwed. Just kidding. The princess is a very special card, almost as important as the ace of her suit. In fact, the princess is actually part of the ace. She's called the throne of the ace. More on this a little later. But it's the other 12 court cards that are the best candidates for the significator. These 12 court cards, the knights, queens, and princes, or the kings, queens, and knights, rule the degrees of the zodiac in a very elegant and anal retentive order. The method to the madness is based on the hermetic fact of life that it's the cosmic duty of the elements to mix with each other. I call it the adopted decan program. Briefly, these 12 court cards each rule 30 degrees of the zodiac. The 4 queens rule 20 degrees of the cardinal signs of the zodiac. The 4 princes rule 20 degrees of the fixed signs of the zodiac, and the knights or kings rule 20 degrees of the mutable signs. But as you can see in this slide, each of the 12 court cards backs up and adopts the last 10 degrees of the previous sign of the zodiac. Now, if you have a deck of tarot cards handy and can quickly get it out now, I know that all of us aren't astrologers, so I'm going to show you a chart here with the dates and degrees of the zodiac that the court cards and small cards represent. So you can read it better. I've broken it up into a couple slides. Here's the first 6 months. If you were born between January and mid-July, find your court card. And there's also a small card